Boy finds buried rope, gut tells him to pull. Panicked, he shouted at everyone to stop pulling. Then he immediately called the authorities and reported what he thought they found. As he waited for help, he grew more and more impatient. He needed to know what lay beneath the surface, but he couldn't put everyone in danger. Why? What on earth did they find? 10-year-old Charles Bowes was walking through the forest with his parents when he decided to venture off the beaten trail. It was a habit he'd gotten into every weekend when his parents would take him on their weekly outdoor hikes and trails. Charles was a very inquisitive kid whose curiosity gave him a wild imagination. But never in a million years would he have dreamt of discovering this. The sun was high in the clear blue sky. It shined down through the gaps of the trees overhead like a heavenly disco light. Charles walked in front of his parents who were engrossed in conversation behind him. He turned to shout back at them, "I'm going to see the lake." Then he darted down the trail and veered into the bushes, out of sight. He stepped over fallen trees and pushed his way through thick prickly bushes and long grass to reach the meadow that surrounded the secluded lake. His eyes surveyed the ominous-looking lake as he let out a sharp whoa under his breath. Charles lived for these kinds of hidden wonderlands. He imagined he was the first person to find this place. His imagination wasn't too far off. He soaked in the view as if the lake water and trees could talk. Then he carefully made his way through the slippy, muddy ground to the water's edge. That's when he noticed it. The half-buried piece of rope. Curious, he approached it, bent down and dug his hands into the mud to lift it out. With 2 hands, he pulled and pulled. Completely unaware of what was on the other end. He was at the water's edge, staring at the mysterious rope that led into the dark depths of the lake. He couldn't pull any harder. Now, he needed help, so he raced back to the trail to ask his parents for help. They followed him, always willing to entertain his curious mind. But this time, they failed to realize the danger they'd all get into. His parents picked up the rope with Charles, and they all pulled. They managed to get a few inches of rope free before Charles spotted something under the waters. "Look. Is it a shipwreck?" he asked his father as he pointed to something shiny beneath the surface. "No. How could a ship get in this isolated lake?" he questioned. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed from the distance. They turned around to see a group of men walking towards them. One of the men was shouting at them, asking them if they needed help with the rope. Charles was delighted to see help arrive. As was his father, who was now thoroughly invested in the strange mysterious object that lay hidden just out of their reach. But things were about to take a deadly turn. The men pulled, and the rope slowly began to lift. The shiny object in the water was now at the surface level, but there was a problem. One of the men who came to help noticed the strange markings on the side of the object. Charles watched as his eyes grew big with fear. Suddenly, he shouted at everyone to stop pulling. He immediately called the authorities and reported what he thought Charles had found. He told everyone to set the rope down gently and back away until help arrived. There was no way they could pull this thing out of the lake by themselves, and he was pretty sure it would be far too dangerous. But what happened next shocked everyone. As help arrived at the scene, Charles got more and more impatient. He desperately wanted to know what he found. Why did the man call the authorities? And why did he think it was dangerous? The authorities attached a rope to their trucks to hoist it up properly. As they got to work, the strange white markings on its side came into view, followed by an enormous hatch. What was it? Charles had found a Komatsu D-375A2 abandoned war tank that was dumped in the bottom of the lake near Jovi, Estonia. As it turned out, the tank had been submerged in the lake for 56 years. At 27 tons, the tank lay at a depth of 7 meters resting under a 3-meter layer of peat. But what was it doing there? After they pulled the tank out of the water, they discovered that it was actually a trophy tank that had been captured by the German army from the Soviet army. Historians theorized that the tank was driven into the lake so as the enemy wouldn't be able to get their hands on it. Since then, it hadn't seen a soul. But there was something else that was special about this tank. Despite some metal rusting from water damage, it was in remarkable condition for being submerged underwater for 56 years. Because of this, there was a fear that its ammunition could still be intact and unstable. It was this concern that triggered a fearful response in one of the men earlier. Thankfully, however, nothing seemed amiss. By the time the authorities came over to haul the tank out of the lake, a crowd of passers-by had gathered around to watch the fascinating side of a piece of history being recovered. Charles watched in amazement as his curiosity led him to a discovery beyond his wildest imaginations. People took pictures and posed beside Charles's massive tank discovery.